Thank you, Father Gitter, Father Becker, Reverend Fathers, honored guests, and my brothers. Meine Herren! My vocation story is one that has had some very fascinating twists and turns. I was born to a good Catholic family. We were homeschooled, since my mother was a teacher already, and my parents had no desire to put us through the atrocity that public school has become. Nor could we afford the Catholic school, which isn't always much better anyway. I'm fairly certain that the priesthood was always on my radar, since I can remember talking about church fairly often, and whenever we built something, say, out of blocks, my first building was always the town church. At this point, if you had asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would have likely responded, I want to be an astronaut and a priest at the same time. Who could resist being part of the church and exploring the final frontier, right? Then I saw Apollo 13, and the astronaut part, at least, was over. It just wasn't as cool or safe as the Starship Enterprise. From that point on, I was always looking for things to learn about the church, to learn about the priesthood. I even did indeed start saying Mass in my basement, although mine never got quite as elaborate as some of the other ones we've heard about. Then I started getting into my most favorite thing on the planet, lingua latina. While this may seem to be a pointless digression, wait one moment. The Latin I learned, while often referring to the Roman Empire, was very much centered on the Catholic Church, the Mass, and the writings of the saints. So as I learned Latin, I was, dare I say it amongst this crowd, learning more about the Church and falling in love with her. I had been going on vocations retreats throughout this time, constantly feeling excited about the priesthood. Then when my senior year rolled around, I was ready. I was constantly bugging my vocations director for what I needed to apply to seminary. So around the beginning of Lent 2009, I began the application with no problems until I got to the psychological examination. Without going into too much detail, suffice it to say that the test was incorrectly administered, compounded with my great nervousness, caused the diocese to reject my application, and further informed me that I need not apply again. So, at least, as I perceived it, in one fell stroke, both of my favorite things in the world, the church and science, had turned against me. If I may quote a psalm that we say in the Office of Readings, Psalm 55, if this had been done by an enemy, I could bear his taunts. If a rival had risen against me, I would hide from him. But it is you, my own companion, my intimate friend. This, of course, threw me into great confusion. I began to wonder whether or not I had been making up my call to priesthood in the first place. I had only considered the priesthood, not much else, so I had no idea what to do with my life. Then I heard there was a program called GAP. This was a program where you take a year off of school and do service in another community or country. I was assigned to Belfast, Northern Ireland. So after getting used to the accent, the strange phrases like asking, "What's the crack?" meaning, "What's going on?" I spent 8.5 months in Belfast doing youth work with a group called Youth Initiatives. I taught in a Catholic high school most of the time, teaching a few lessons on the faith to 7th through 11th graders. It was very difficult living in a place where you're the only one who has an accent. I also had to make the faith my own, and by doing so, my devotion to the Mass increased exponentially. While I was there, I was haunted by the thought that the desires that I had had might not be the right ones. I wondered if it was a selfish, childish desire. I was constantly asking God, "What do you want of me?" Towards the end of my stay, I spent a week in retreat with the purpose of being very intentional about getting at least a nudge of an answer. As I was reading the scriptures assigned to me, I came across a passage in Romans that told me to move forward with God's plan. So I began the process again. Let me tell you, it is a little strange applying to seminary when you're not even in the same country as your vocations director. When I returned to the United States, I was very concerned about taking that test once again. However, as divine providence would have it, I had lived with a psychiatrist while in Belfast, so he wrote a letter on my behalf to the diocese, which I assume was good because 3 weeks later I was a seminarian. We tend to think that this is where the story ends. Here's how I got to seminary, I'm here, the end. While this is true in a sense, respondeo, that this was the start of something even more beautiful. When I arrived at the seminary, I was still very much unsure of my vocation, yet also fairly certain, since God's grace was the only explanation that I was in seminary. Through the priests here, especially my spiritual director, Father Bauer, I was able to face these fears and many others, probably ones that you've experienced in your own callings. I'm not good enough. I'm far too broken to do these sorts of things. I've never been able to do things like talk to people. How am I expected to start now? The list goes on. In spite of all I have suffered and continue to suffer, no, because of it, I have been better equipped to serve Christ's bride, the church. To quote, well, more paraphrase, someone of whom you may or may not have heard, James T. Kirk, pain is the thing we carry with us, the thing that makes us who we are. But I would add this distinction to that statement. Because through it, God has purified me and conformed me to his Son. So, my brothers, I would leave you with this thought. Our vocation may not, in fact, rarely does it come easily, even if it does seem to at first. We must persevere through all trials, trusting first in God's divine providence and love for us, and second, in the consolation that we have been given previously for this vocation. This last, I can say, has helped me through many a hard time in the seminary. Whenever we think of a vocation story, we normally think of only how a man got his vocation. But it is much more than that. It is the deepening of a relationship. Men are called to experience the love of the person of Jesus Christ. God's will, our vocation, and through that, whatever it may be, the salvation of souls, that is truly the final frontier that we should seek to explore. Praised be Jesus Christ.
Now and forever.